I just want my kids back. This was the tagline for 2005's Homeless Dad, a movie starring Thomas Jane as a homeless dad, of course, struggling to win back custody of his children. Even though the film was successful enough to be lauded as the #3 movie in America upon its release, the critical response was more muted, with many calling it too formulaic, and Jane himself admitting he only did the film as part of a deal with the studio to allow him to also make his passion project, Junk, a hard-hitting drama about a junkie's life. Now, if you're racking your brain trying to figure out why you can't remember either Homeless Dad or Junk, don't worry, the movies aren't real, at least not in our universe. They're from the world of the popular Fox sitcom Arrested Development. In particular, the 2004 Patty Jenkins-directed episode, The One Where They Build a House, in which the Bluth family attempts to sneakily build a fake house in order to make good on a deal regarding their failing California housing development. Thomas Jane guest starred as himself, in the episode posing as a homeless man in order to do research for his upcoming role in Homeless Dad. And while it was primarily just a gag about the sort of method acting some actors are known for, the role still might have elicited real memories for Jane. The future leading man dropped out of his Maryland high school at age 17 after he was recruited by Indian movie producers to fly to India and star in a 1987 Telugu adaptation of Romeo and Juliet. Although the film received rave reviews in India, Jane did not stay to pursue potential stardom in the country. Instead, he headed to LA to pursue a career in Hollywood. But when he struggled to find acting jobs, he did for a time find himself homeless on the LA streets, sleeping on park benches and busking for money with his guitar, the only possession he had. Small roles in the Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie and Crow City of Angels would finally come his way. A lead role in the 1997 indie drama The Last Time I Committed Suicide, in which Jane played famous Beat Generation figure Neil Cassidy and acted opposite Keanu Reeves, could have been his big breakthrough. But the film was misguidedly released as counter-programming in the summer of 1997, where it was swallowed up at the box office by Con Air, Batman and Robin, and, ironically, the Reeves-free Speed 2 Cruise Control. But Jane's breakthrough would come later that same year, with his small but important role as Todd Parker in Paul Thomas Anderson's Boogie Nights. A successful film and TV career would follow, with lead roles in genre films like Deep Blue Sea, Dreamcatcher, and The Mist, a critically acclaimed turn as Mickey Mantle in the TV movie 61, and starring roles in the HBO series Hung and the Amazon sci-fi series The Expanse. But even as Jane's career has flourished, he's never forgotten those days spent living on the streets of LA. In fact, he even credits the experience as the potential origin behind one of his most odd and well-known quirks, his hatred of shoes. Yes, Thomas Jane is widely known as a man who prefers to be barefoot wherever and whenever he can, including at red carpet premieres, conventions, press junkets, and events promoting his films, and even, as is often captured in paparazzi photos, simply walking around the city streets of New York and LA. While many co-stars have playfully mocked his avoidance of footwear, and many on social media have expressed disgust at the idea of being barefoot in potentially dirty public places, Jane has defended the decision by saying it's at least partly meant as advocacy, saying, "I hope when people see me barefoot, they think of all the people who can't afford shoes. I'm hoping to raise a little bit of awareness of the homeless in America, especially children." If that seems like a somewhat goofy rationale to you, rest assured Jane has admitted there's also a more spiritual element to it for him, explaining, "I also hope that maybe people will think, I bet that feels good. The sensation of walking barefoot on grass, on this carpet, then walking down the hall and on the tiles, the coolness of that. I love the sensation of feeling my body connected with my environment, whereas with shoes on, your feet are just imprisoned all day." It's hard to say how many, if any, Jane has recruited to his anti-shoe campaign over the years, and to be fair, even he has his limits, admitting he gladly wears shoes or boots when it's simply too cold outside. And of course, he's willing to wear shoes in character. After all, when you're playing a murderous vigilante frequently storming through glass and rubble-strewn war zones of your own creation, it seems likely you want some foot protection. The year is 2004, and Lionsgate Films and Marvel Entertainment are ready to give a beloved comic character his second chance at cinematic glory, and launch a brand new revenge action franchise in the process with The Punisher. welcome once again to Failure to Franchise, the show dedicated to some of Hollywood's most infamous mistakes, missteps, and misfires. This is Trev.
And I'm Chris, where we're here to debate if this iteration of The Punisher is either Thomas Gain or Thomas Paine. So let's just discuss Thomas Jane.
I mean, not your best work, but...
No, I came up with it, I swear, 20 minutes ago.
Oh. All right, Joe Coy.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
You're bombing like that. Anyways.
A reference I'm gonna blame my writers.
Yeah. A reference that people listen to this episode years from now will never get because he'll be long forgotten probably after last night. But yes, so as Chris just alluded to, this is episode 2 of our New Year's Punishment Party. Our 1 month long look at 3 attempts to get movie franchises going based on the Marvel Comics character, The Punisher. Last time we looked at 1989's The Punisher, a movie not many people even know exists, starring Dolph Lundgren. And this time we're looking at a more high-profile Punisher, one I think both of us have just more to say just from personal experience about. But this is 2004's The Punisher. Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about this one?
For sure. It is directed by Jonathan Hensley. This is his first feature, and he's gone on to direct music videos primarily. But he's kind of a prolific writer. He co-wrote this film with Michael France, but Jonathan Hensley's credits go back to episodes of the Young Indiana Jones series, Die Hard with a Vengeance, a favorite of mine and yours, Jumanji, Armageddon, and The Saint, which is, I think, a film we're going to have to talk about one day.
Yeah.
Michael France is the other co-writer. He wrote Cliffhanger, GoldenEye, and Hulk, another future F2F movie, and then Fantastic Four, the one from the early 2000s, or the mid-2000s.
Well, Chris, I hate to tell you this, too. Like, Cliffhanger is also a future movie for us, too. So there's
potentially, though, because it sounds like they're going to film the next one in the next year or so. So
we'll see.
Okay, fair enough.
It's like I keep watching these, like, this production info about The Accountant 2 maybe going into production, and I'm like, come on, baby, just make it so we can take a movie off our list.
I know. That's me and Constantine 2.
Yeah.
I do not think that movie will happen, but we will see.
We'll see. Well, a movie that definitely did not get a sequel is 2004's The Punisher, so tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah. The budget of the film is $33 million. Domestically, it made $33 million. And, well, that's what's funny, because listeners are probably thinking, oh, that's weird, it made its budget back. Well, listeners who aren't familiar with how box office works, especially back then, you had to double your budget to actually become profitable. Nowadays, it's about a 2.5 multiplier, so think of it that way. Worldwide, this movie only made $54.7 million, so it was actually quite a bomb.
Yeah. And I mean, I've heard stories about how there's another one where it came out just the right time where you hear like, oh, it got a little bit more popular on DVD and everything. But I think that's only true because there is evidence, and we're going to talk about it later, of them trying to get a sequel to this going shortly after. So that's probably like the DVD factor. But even still, it wasn't a big enough hit that anybody was like, obviously that sequel didn't happen, right?
Yeah.
So any attempts that were trying to make a sequel, and as I said, we'll have more to say about this later, we're also looking at, okay, how do we make a sequel either cheaper, or what do we do right this time that we didn't do well enough the first time to where it only eked out a minor profit? You know?
Yeah. So right off the bat, we did this in the other episode with the 89 Punisher, which, again, listeners, go listen to that if you haven't, because we get into way more detail about what we're going to talk about next. But right off the bat, Trev, feelings on the Punisher, we both like the character, yeah? Like, of course we do.
Yeah, as I mentioned last time, like this is a character that I was really into when I was young. At like that first peak of Punisher popularity, which kind of coincided with that Dolph Lundgren movie. From that like 89, 90. As I said, as a kid when I was like 9 and 10, getting into comics, you wanted to read what seemed like the most badass characters, and Punisher was kind of hitting his first kind of peak of popularity at that point, and he just seemed so cool, so different than everything else on the shelf. So I was definitely really into it then. And then I'm going to talk in a little bit more about like the history of the comic in between that movie and this one. But honestly, I'd say this movie, the 2004 Punisher, is probably like the peak of my Punisher fandom, actually. This is when I was the most into the character for very particular reasons, which we'll talk about, that also filter into why this movie was made. So this is a character that, yeah, I do quite enjoy. Like I said, I think I said last time, I have my own peaks and valleys with the character, which is understandable because it's a character that Marvel Comics has had peaks and valleys with.
Right.
But the best Punisher stuff is, to me, some of the best and my favorite comics that Marvel has done. So definitely a character that I get really into when a really good writer is on the book and they know what they're doing.
And I'm similar. It basically, I mean, I guess it kind of started my fandom with the Punisher with this film. So it's just me and Trevor have a little bit of an age difference, and this movie is a little bit seminal to me in my working career. So Punisher, I like him. I'm always down to watch more Punisher, even though I didn't know about the 89 Punisher until just recently. So.
So because you said your introduction was the cartoon, right? The Spider-Man cartoon?
Yes, that was my intro, yeah. So again, it was just from afar, right? So it's kind of like he shows up in a few episodes, right? He's awesome, of course, but doesn't he go after Morbius in the
Probably.
cartoon?
I don't remember that cartoon very well, honestly.
Oh, really?
I was like more of a way, obviously, not surprisingly, much more of an X-Men cartoon guy.
Well, same here though. Yeah. To be honest, that 90s X-Men cartoon is my like favorite cartoon like of all time.
More than Batman, the animated series?
Yeah, I did. I watched X-Men more, and I watched it constantly. And back in the day, my cousins, who were about 10 to 15 years older than me, who got me into all this stuff, they used to, like, they had the toys that I could play with as a kid. Then they started to record the episodes onto VHS as well. So I kind of would watch them all the time. While Batman, I kind of had to catch when it was on. You know what I mean? Yeah. And like, again, I love Batman. I'm staring right now at the whole collector's DVD set I have. But those three, X-Men, Batman, Spider-Man, were just perfect and peak, cartoon for me, for sure.
Yeah, oddly enough, I never got into the Spider-Man one that much. Like, I've seen episodes, but it was never like a thing for me.
Gets wild.
When's the last time? Well, speaking of gets wild, when's the last time you went back and watched and rewatched like the last season of that X-Men cartoon?
Very far in the past, because it's terrible.
Yes, that last season is like infamously bad. It's like borderline unwatchable.
Even as a kid, I realized when they changed the companies, because that's what the whole idea. They changed the animation studio, I think, and the whole thing changed. The whole creative team, I think, was completely disassembled. But I remember even as a kid being like, "Oh no, this is not my X-Men anymore. What have you done to my boy?" So yeah. Anyways,
are you excited about it coming back? X-Men 97 comic.
I actually am.
Now you're not worried that they're making the X-Men woke now?
No, I kind of I do not, especially because the X-Men have always been
I know.
woke. But I actually have been trying my best to stay away from anything regarding that animated series. I'm not super excited about a lot of MCU stuff that's going on right now, but that one was very surprising, and if they stick the landing on that, I think it could be something quite special.
Agreed, for sure. But we're not here to talk about X-Men, so I don't even know why I asked that.
Yeah, you have another podcast, okay? Stop infecting my podcast as well, okay?
Well, let's get back to the Punisher, and like, if anything, it's surprising to me to hear, like, it's interesting for me to hear about someone being introduced to the Punisher in a cartoon, because obviously this is not the kind of character you'd think would lend themselves to like a Saturday morning cartoon.
Sure.
For how mature and violent the character can be. Although obviously most of his comic book run would have been, comics that were written at like a PG level or whatever, PG-13 perhaps. But maybe we should talk a little bit about that, about where the Punisher was when this movie came out and how we got to this movie on the comics front, because as we said last time, the one saving grace of the 1989 Punisher kind of being buried and not coming out for a couple of years in America and then just getting dumped straight to video is that even though a lot of people saw it, felt it was like not a great film, and it just didn't have enough of an impact to damage the character. It was such an afterthought. It didn't derail the emerging popularity of that character on the comic page. So as I said, like from the early 90s is still the heyday of the Punisher. He gets by 1992 or 3, I want to say, or maybe even earlier, he has 3 ongoing monthly titles, which is kind of special for one singular character. He has the Punisher Warzone, and Punisher War Journal. He's so popular at this point, Chris. I don't know if you saw this. They even do these specials called the Punisher Armory, which are just like it's a comic book you buy, but it's not even like really a comic book. It's just pictures of his guns and descriptions of his different weapons.
Wow.
That's the how popular this character is. He was guest starring and everything, but this is a cycle that we see over and over in every media form. What happens when a character gets really popular and they start to overexpose him? That popularity goes away. People get sick of the character. So by 1995, his sales, all the sales of all 3 books, were really starting to dwindle because people were just tired of it. There'd been so much Punisher. Like, not only does he have 3 titles, but he's guest starring and everything. And it was just getting to be a bit much, And I also think in the 90s, even though Punisher is a really extreme character, like just by concept, a vigilante who just murders every criminal he comes across, still comics were entering kind of a new phase. And the 90s is when we get like the emergence of Image, which we've talked about before back in our Spawn episode. You can go back and listen to that. But like kind of a new art style and a new like extreme mentality takes over in comics.
Yeah.
And maybe because Punisher had been like the extreme character since the mid 80s, maybe he suddenly felt a little old fashioned to people, So just the sales go down and Marvel decides to cancel all 3 titles. So in 1995, all 3 titles are canceled. With the final crossover event called Countdown. But this is the way comics work too. When they cancel them all, it's probably just to make people miss the character a little bit. They're obviously already thinking about how to bring him back.
Yeah.
And their first attempt, it happens really quickly, like right away. As soon as the series are canceled, just a couple months later, they do relaunch a new Punisher title.
It's the Jay-Z retirement of comics.
Yeah, or Kiss, Elton John, whatever you want. Like all these, Cher, yeah.
Yeah.
So the Punisher goes away just for a little bit, and then comes back with a brand new Punisher #1, a really bizarre new reinvention of the Punisher, where he ends up joining the mob. Basically, like a mafia family comes to him and says, "Hey, you've spent years trying to take us out, but what if you took over for us? Like, what if you were our leader?" And he actually agrees. Not surprisingly, people aren't so hot on this story.
Yeah, I was about to say.
It's bizarre. It's an interesting novelty to go back and read now, but it only lasts 18 issues and it is canceled. So the Punisher again goes away. And then in 1998, they make another attempt at bringing the character back, and this is probably the most infamous period in the character's history. Because in 1998, around this time, Marvel started a new imprint called Marvel Knights, which, Chris, that probably sounds somewhat familiar to you. We still see some movies released, or have seen movies released under that banner, including the one we're talking about today, I think. And Marvel Knights was an attempt by Joe Quesada, the editor at the time, to kind of highlight the darker, more street-level Marvel characters. So characters like Daredevil and I believe Blade and Ghost Rider, Moon Knight, they were put under the Marvel Knights banner. So they launched a new Punisher book in 1998 under the Marvel Knights banner, except this one is a supernatural book where it is revealed that the Punisher has committed suicide and these rogue angels have taken him and brought him back to Earth and basically are using him to hunt down demons. So he's now an angelic Punisher.
Weird.
Who once he sees demons and goes on his Punisher killing spree, suddenly a red glowing symbol appears on his forehead. His eyes glow red, and his guns, which he pulls out of his trench coat, are supernatural guns. They're these spirit guns, basically.
Yeah.
Chris, I don't want to shock you here. People hate this. Basically,
It sounds awful. It sounds like Spawn and Ghost Rider all mangled into one, just gobbledygook.
It's terrible. Any good ideas that even exist in it, right, are just feel out of place here because it feels like a complete betrayal of this particular character.
Totally.
Maybe that would have worked for a new character. The idea of this person committed suicide and these rogue angels bring him back to Earth as their operative. That's not the worst idea. It's not what anyone wants to see Frank Castle doing.
No.
It just feels what are you doing? You're pissing all over everything we liked about this character before. So this does not last very long at all. I think it's one 4-issue miniseries, then one more 4-issue miniseries that crosses him over with Wolverine. Even that attempt to he's piling around with Wolverine. You guys like that, right? And everyone's no, we don't.
Yeah.
So that gets canceled.
Wow.
Now they're kind of spinning their wheels, right? What do we do? This IP is too popular to not do anything with, but we've tried 2 times to reinvent it. What can we possibly do? So we're going to backtrack a little bit here because in 1995, a writer by the name of Garth Ennis did do a Punisher one-shot called Punisher Kills the Marvel Universe. However, his work on this, he ended up like quitting Marvel like right after doing this book, because he said like once he saw the book published, he found out that they changed a bunch of his dialogue without consulting him, kind of sanded down the edges a little bit. He wasn't very happy with how it turned out, so he quit Marvel. He was a rising star at this time, primarily at this point for a lot of his work on 2000 AD, writing Judge Dredd stories. We've talked about Judge Dredd before.
Right.
So he kind of made his name there, and then he kind of comes over to the States and starts working for both Marvel and DC. But as I said, his Marvel run is kind of short-lived because he gets really mad about the what they do to his 1995 Punisher book. But that same year, when he like, you know, he's also working for DC. He's been writing stories for Hellblazer, which is the John Constantine book you just mentioned. We're going to eventually maybe do Constantine. So he's working already in Vertigo, which is DC's imprint for more mature titles. And him and artist Steve Dillon launched a Vertigo title called Preacher. Now, people probably have heard that title. If you know me, you've probably heard it because that is my favorite comic book of all time. It's definitely the thing that makes Garth Ennis like a household name in the comic book world. You know, it's an instant success, instant smash success. This like really crazy, you know, supernatural road trip story about a preacher who, kind of a fallen preacher who is granted the voice of God, which means he has this superpower to where whatever he tells you to do, you will instantly do. To the point where, like, if he says "go fuck yourself," you will instantly like cut off your own dick and shove it up your ass. Like, like people are like very literal about the ways he says things.
Yeah.
And it's him teaming up with a vampire named Cassidy and his ex-girlfriend, criminal named Tulip, and the three of them hitting the road to go track down God, who Jesse Custer finds out has abandoned humanity, and he's going to find God and demand to know why. An insane book, crazy stories, but just awesome. I mean, it's like I said, it's my favorite book of all time. It was eventually adapted into a TV show that was okay. I mean, the TV show was like a very loose adaptation. I still hope someday we'll get like an actual, more accurate adaptation. But whatever. So that has made Garth Ennis like a huge household name in the comic realm, and it has this like really like dark, you know, comedic but mature sensibility. So Marvel kind of comes back around to Garth Ennis and says, you know what? Okay, sorry about what happened with the Punisher Kills the Marvel Universe, but maybe you are the guy. Maybe you're the guy to bring back the Punisher. And sure enough, in 2000, Garth Ennis with Marvel Knights launches a 12-issue miniseries called Welcome Back, Frank, which is like kind of the reintroduction of the Punisher to the Marvel Universe, taking him back to basics, right? Forgetting all that angel crap, not having him work with the mafia, but just putting him back to the Punisher is a killer vigilante who will take out, you know, criminals left and right. But the thing Garth Ennis does is him and Steve Dillon again. And yes, I should say he brings over Steve Dillon for this too. His Preacher artist, because they've just wrapped up Preacher, so they go from that over to this new Punisher run. And he infuses the book with this like really dark sense of humor. It's like a very comedic book, but you know, in a way that still stays true to the spirit of what people like about this character.
Totally.
He even has a moment where like people were really interested when that book came out, including me. I remember this, of like, how is he going to acknowledge like the angel thing? Like the last time we saw him, he was an angel. And the book starts and he's just Frank Castle again. He's just the Punisher. And at the end of the first issue, as he has a criminal tied up and he's throwing him off the Empire State Building, you just hear his voiceover and he just says like, I saw heaven once. You know, the angels took me up and they showed me my wife and my kids. You know, they weren't happy with what I was doing they wanted me to work for them. They weren't happy with it. Then they showed me my wife and kids, and they thought it would be like hell for me that they sent me back to Earth, denied me heaven. And then as he's killing this guy, he's like, they were wrong. He's like, this is what I love doing. This is what I'm here for.
That's cool.
Yeah. So this 12-issue miniseries is such a huge hit that right afterwards they ask Ennis, do you want to stay on and do a new monthly? And that begins, or I mean, I guess I should say Welcome Back, Frank begins. Garth Ennis does a 9-year run with this character.
Wow. I didn't realize it was 9 years. Holy shit.
Yeah, 9 years. And even since that 9 years, that's a 9-year consistent run. And then even since then, he's popped back here and there to do miniseries. But I know this is going long, but the last thing I'll say about that 9-year run is what's very interesting is after the Welcome Back, Frank 12-issue miniseries and the new monthly he starts, for a while, he kind of maintains that dark comic, like the same kind of Preacher tone in the comic.
Right.
But at a certain point, you see Ennis kind of get bored with that, and he's even acknowledged he stops wanting the Punisher to even feel like he's part of the Marvel Universe. So he's never really been comfortable crossing Punisher over with other superheroes, and he wants to kind of drop a lot of any element of fantasy or superpowers. So he kind of drops the humor almost completely. or I should say, yeah, totally, at a certain point. And the book just becomes this like really hard-hitting crime book. The stories have no more acknowledgments of like the other elements of the Marvel universe. It's just vigilante tales with the Punisher taking on like in some cases like the IRA or child pornographers. And it's just Garth Ennis kind of mining like real world, atrocities and real world crime and putting the Punisher into that and telling these really hard boiled, intense, violent stories with no sense of humor, just dark and violent. And yeah, like a 9-year run with 2 different tones, both very successful, I think. And I'll just say, like, that's what I say. Like, the reason I say that this movie hits at the peak of my Punisher popularity is it hits during that Ennis run. And to me, still today, Garth Ennis is the best Punisher author. Like there's no better Punisher writer than Garth Ennis. So sorry that was so long-winded, but I felt like
that was great. That was great. I love that. That was great.
Yeah, I think it's worth acknowledging because I don't think this movie happens, obviously, if not for Ennis coming onto the book and making the Punisher relevant again.
Oh yeah,
and making him like a super popular again. Like it needed that Welcome Back, Frank. It needed Ennis to bring the character back down to basics and remind people what they loved about the character in the first place.
And this movie in general was just so modeled after his run. Like it was Garth Ennis makes his revamping of the character back to basics, and then this movie's like, okay, we're just gonna basically do that.
Yeah. When we get into the review, I'll talk about that, about like how much this movie is just pulled directly from Welcome Back, Frank in particular.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, where does Tim Bradstreet come into play?
So Tim Bradstreet was the cover artist for Garth Ennis' run. Yeah,
okay.
so he does
he doesn't do the panels.
He doesn't do the interior art. No, Tim Bradstreet is more of like a cover artist because he does these like really kind of cool painterly pieces. I remember like I had like mixed feelings about Tim Bradstreet as a Punisher fan because every cover that he does is great, but there's also kind of like a samey quality to all of them. And I was still always, I think maybe because of the time period I grew up in initially, I always liked when covers kind of really reflected the story inside. And that's not necessarily what Tim Bradstreet does. Tim Bradstreet always just does like a cool painting of the Punisher. And it's not always indicating like what you're actually getting in the interior. But that said, if you just look up Tim Bradstreet Punisher, you're going to be met with a bunch of like these awesome pieces of art of the Punisher. So, yeah.
And the reason I bring him up is because his art was pretty substantial in the reason why Thomas Jane finally said yes to playing the Punisher.
Yes.
Because on the film side, this movie goes back to 2000. And Marvel had made an agreement with Artisan Entertainment to turn 15 of their characters into film and TV. And the Punisher, this one, was going to be the first one, I believe, to really have Marvel's hands all over it. And kind of have its like first major independent release as like I think a majority owner in the property. So
yeah, in fact, I'm sure you saw a pretty significant name in the credits, right, as one of the producers.
Did I? Who is it?
Sir Kevin Feige.
Oh, Kevin Feige isn't he?
Yes, Kevin Feige was involved with the production of this movie.
Oh, that's great. Well, that actually answers some questions. Which we'll get to. Yeah. That's great. I didn't even notice that. Okay, cool. This is why I keep you around. And not just, go off to your X-Men podcast, But yeah, so Thomas Jane was, oddly enough, because I'm going to ask you this question too, was seemingly the first and only actor they went to. And he turned it down twice because, well, by his acknowledgement, wasn't super into Marvel and DC. It wasn't really super into superheroes because they were a little too goofy for him. The whole spandex thing kind of turned him off. He was like, I don't really want to do this. But then Avi Arad, famed producer of especially all the Spider-Man films, he sends Tim Bradstreet's art to Thomas Jane to lure him into the role. And then he's realizing, oh, wow, they want to do something badass, more realistic. He then starts going into comic book stores and reading everything he can get his hands on. And he wants to push this movie into a realistic way, making more of like a Taxi Driver film. And then obviously started reading the Garth Ennis stuff. And I have to ask you, from the research, I could not find this, but why? I love Thomas Jane. I really do. I like the guy a lot. And we're going to talk about him in certain movies that we like of him and whatnot. But why do you think they went to him and only him?
Yeah, I don't know. It's not surprising to me that around this time he would have been on like a short list.
Exactly.
But yeah, when you say he was their first and only choice, that's what's kind of mind-boggling to me. Even including like as you're alluding to here, like where he was at in his career at this point.
Yeah.
Because he had not really broken as like a leading man yet. Like, he was one of those actors everyone was like, he might be at that level of like, we always have these guys who are like, oh cool, Thomas Jane, I can't wait for him to get his like leading man role. I like seeing him
Totally.
in things. But I feel like that's where he was definitely at this point. I mean, like, nobody came out of Dreamcatcher in 2003 being like, there, a movie star is born,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Obviously he'd been the lead in Deep Blue Sea, which was a hit. But again, that was not a hit because Thomas Jane was in it. It's a hit because people wanted to see super smart sharks eat Samuel L. Jackson, So it's like, yeah, I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
I remember, and as you said, we're going to talk more about our feelings on Thomas Jane in general, but I do remember at this time, like, as I said, I was a huge Punisher fan, and I was excited a new Punisher movie was being made. And when I heard that Thomas Jane was cast, I even had kind of a feeling like, huh? Like, all right,
Yeah.
I guess. I actually remember who I really wanted to play the Punisher at this point, and this will kind of seem like dated now, but I was like dead set on them.
You're like
getting
Kevin Spacey.
No, I really wanted it to be Christopher Maloney.
Ooh, totally. Yes.
I still see that in my head. And I thought Christopher Maloney looked like the Tim Bradstreet illustrations, like more
that's
than Thomas
great.
Jane does. Yeah. And obviously this was at like the height of like SVU, and it's just like, and also seeing him in Oz, it's like, oh, he just has like the right intensity. He looks like the Punisher. Mm-hmm. That's who I wanted really bad. And as you said, like he was never even in the mix. I never even saw his name brought up. So
No.
I don't know.
No.
Yeah. I don't know. I wonder. What performance of Thomas Jane's do you think was the one where they're like, that's the guy? Because that must have been it, right? They must have seen him in something and said, like, oh, that's him. But I don't know.
It's got to be The Sweetest Thing with Cameron Diaz.
It's got to be.
Yeah, it's strange. Again, I like Thomas Jane a lot. And like you said just now, that you're excited to see him in movies. And it's an odd choice. We'll get to our opinion on the film in general, but back to the behind the scenes. Jonathan Hensley takes over as directing the film, and he's given a smaller budget, and as I said before, and then a shorter shooting time too. I read here 52 days to shoot, and typically speaking, you get around upwards of 90 to shoot a action flick. So heavily cut in half. He wanted to base the film around 1960s and 70s movies like Dirty Harry, Bonnie and Clyde, Mad Max, and also shaping some plot points with Othello, which is cool, which we'll talk about. He changed a lot of things, but also took a lot of things from the Ennis runs. I don't really want to talk about that right now. We'll talk about that in the movie. That's cool. Okay.
Of course, yeah.
Okay. But other than that, they kind of were ready to go. They just needed a villain. And it sounded like the villain that they went right to was John Travolta. What's strange about this is John Travolta is coming off some big bombs. Mm-hmm. He does Battlefield Earth in 2000. And then the next one of note is probably Swordfish the next day. Could you imagine? But
explain. I'm pretty sure he has the same haircut in this he had in Swordfish. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, the same wig, respectfully. But Swordfish he does in 2001. And then, yeah, he is cast as the villain, Howard Saint. And listeners, if you have already watched The Punisher in prep for listening to us talk about it, or you're about to watch it, you're probably wondering, it's weird that this New York City vigilante spends all his time in Tampa, Florida. Mm-hmm. And listeners, I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking the same thing back in 2004. I was thinking the same thing last week when I watched it. And it sounds like everybody has been asking that question over the years.
Because you can say it doesn't matter where it takes place. Oh, the Punisher just needs to be in a city. But yeah, it's like one of those ultimate cliches when people say like, oh, New York is like the fifth character in this movie. Yeah, but that's so true. Like New York just is a character, and and as you said, Thomas Jane was trying to make Taxi Driver, which needs the grime of New York.
Yeah. And the reason why it's in Tampa is just because John Travolta didn't want to be far from home.
Yep.
That's it. He lived there, and he's a pilot, and it was easy access for him to fly in and out and then go home. And the reason why production changed to Tampa was not because of tax credits, was not because of budgetary cuts, was not because of script changes. It was because they got, a mega movie star to be the villain. So concessions were made, and me and Trev both watched an interview with Thomas Jane that was, I think it happened 6 to 8 months ago, actually, from this recording. And he still seems pretty miffed about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's strange, but it's like it is. That's the concessions you make when you're making this movie at this like budget level, right? As you said, and that also explains like why they even went to someone like Travolta. Like you just said, he was coming off a string of bombs, but for them that was perfect, right?
Yeah.
Because they're operating at a low budget level. They're up there. This is still like a small, run and gun, almost independent production, essentially. So he's at just the right level of stardom to still be a name that obviously they're probably thinking will get us like international sales and, will bring some attention to the project in a way that Thomas Jane won't. You put John Travolta's name and face on the poster, that draws more eyes because, he's coming off a string of bombs, but, Pulp Fiction, Face Off, Get Shorty, that's not too far out of people's memories. So Travolta's had that weird career, right, where it's comeback after comeback after comeback. So
yeah.
maybe you're always thinking maybe we'll be the beginning of his next comeback. That's like it's got to happen somewhere, right? So
it's interesting. I'm looking here. They both were in '98's The Thin Red Line. Mm-hmm. Interesting. I didn't know that. Do they share screen time? Do you know?
I don't remember. It's been a long time since the movie. There's a lot of people in that movie, and it's a lot of just like individual kind of characters doing their own things. So it's not like everybody crosses over with everybody.
Right. I mean, that'll do it for the behind the scenes. I'm kind of ready to talk about the movie proper. How about you?
Yeah, me too. Let's get into it.
Away in time, you may come back someday.
Kill them all.
Live once more, or die once more. But in time will be no more.
Wrote that for you. I'm gonna say it at your funeral.
You're supposed to be dead.
Get up. Wheel the money out. Out the window.
You know whose money this is? You know whose building this is?
Howard Saints. You're not gonna believe this.
We're really sorry about your family.
What do you think he does?
Maybe he's an artist.
Get everyone in. We're going hunting.
This is not vengeance. No, it's not vengeance. It's punishment.
Call the Russian.
Took everything from me.
Make Castle dead!
Those who do evil to others will come to know me well.
No one's ever stood up for me before.
Call me the Punisher. Shouldn't play with knives.
During an undercover operation led by Special Agent Frank Castle, the son of a corrupt businessman, Howard Saint, is killed. Frank retires after this mission and meets up in Puerto Rico for a generational family reunion. Unbeknownst to Frank, Howard Saint has discovered his true identity and enacts revenge by wiping out everyone at the reunion, including his parents, wife, and son. The gunmen leave Frank for dead, but miraculously he survives to avenge his family and become the judge, jury, and executioner known as the Punisher.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Judge Dredd for a second.
I almost did, actually.
Well, Chris, you went first on 1989's The Punisher, so I'll go first on this one because I also know you have like a little bit more of a story about this movie and everything.
Sure.
But yeah, like as I said, like I'll talk briefly about my my own history of this movie, or I guess I already did. Just that I was so excited for this movie when it came out. Now I was a little miffed because, as I said, I wasn't super excited about Thomas Jane as the Punisher. And this wasn't helped by the fact that the first like promo image they released when he was cast is just so unbelievably bad. It's like the worst like looking like bullshit cosplay photo you'll ever see. Thankfully, that was just like a promo photo that they obviously quickly threw together. But by the time the movie came out, I'd seen the trailer. You know, I was kind of still. Travolta was coming off a series of bombs, but even something like Swordfish, which was terrible, he was kind of fun in. So I went into this thinking like, oh, you know, John Travolta can play like a campy bad guy. I knew they were basing a lot of this off the Garth Ennis book. So I went into this pretty excited in 2004.
Sure.
And I would say my feelings then are not too different than my feelings now. If we're talking about like making a Punisher movie, and especially if we're comparing it to the 1989 version, I would say getting closer, getting warmer. I think when this movie is a Punisher movie, I am enjoying it. I think it's pretty enjoyable. I think this is a fun, better Punisher movie than the previous one we looked at. I do think this movie has some issues, which I know, I want to talk about as we get into the review. I think what this movie's biggest, problem is that, as I said, they were heavily looking at the Garth Ennis run. And I said in the when I was talking about Garth Ennis' run earlier, that he wrote two different kinds of Punisher stories. He would write like dark humor Punisher stories or really serious crime stories. And either of those can work as a Punisher story, but you kind of got to stick to one or the other tonally. And I think this movie has a tendency to kind of wildly bounce back and forth in tone from being like the very silly dark comedy Garth Ennis run to being the more serious vigilante, dark violent story. And I think it's fine when it's concentrating on one of those, but the tonal shifts are a little extreme and it kind of hurts this a little bit. But that said, I still like it. And especially now, maybe I'll take back something I just said because I said my feelings are kind of the same. But I actually think maybe I like it a little bit more now than I did back then, just because this has come up in other movies we talked about. It feels so different than a lot of stuff we've got in more recent years, like comic book movies. And this is a movie that even some of its like weaknesses and some of like, the clear budgetary limitations and the fact that, some of the bizarre character decisions, it still feels like a little bit more, I don't know. It doesn't feel as over bloated and, extreme and ridiculous as a lot of the comic movies we've got recently. So this kind of has like a nice nostalgic vibe to it. It feels like a cool little early 2000s action movie, and that kind of works to its benefit now in a way that maybe was like a little disappointing at the time. So that's just all like another long-winded way of saying, yeah, ultimately I like this movie. I don't love it, but I like it. I think this is a good one.
Sure. I like that you mentioned just the difference of time. The early 2000s were for comic book films versus now, right? It was almost
this is a pre-Iron Man movie, Like,
oh yeah, this is a pre-Batman Begins. This is the awkward years.
Yes,
this is
and that's what I mean. I'm glad you said that. That's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
It's the awkward years, and this movie is like representative of the awkward years,
big time.
But in a way that now I find kind of fun,
Yeah, and I think. First of all, I'm going to say that I fucking really enjoyed it this time. So I think I'm going to try to push you even further into your like.
You're probably going to, because even as I said that, that's why I was like, what? No, I'm like, I shouldn't be like, so like, I really did quite like it this time. In fact, I'll tell you this. Let me say one last thing and then I'll let you finally talk.
Sure.
Okay,
Kanye.
Yeah. Let me finish. When this movie first came out on DVD, I bought it. Mm-hmm. And I remember I watched it like maybe a couple more times. And at a certain point, I was like, you know what? I'm not that into this. Like, I don't need to have this DVD. And I actually sold that DVD off because those are back in the days where you'd take the DVDs you didn't want anymore and you'd take them to like the used DVD stores and sell them off and get some credit or whatever. And this is one I got rid of. So for years, I did not have this. Then, when we were talking about doing this run of episodes, as you know, I told you I was at a used DVD store and I saw the 1989 Punisher. Well, I also saw this one, so I was like, well, I guess I should buy both of them. And this time watching it, even though it was DVD and it looks like DVD, it's a terrible transfer. Still, this time I was like, you know what? I'm glad I own this movie now because I actually will revisit this. And it's like, oh yeah, I should have never got rid of this. This is more fun than I remember it being.
So one thing, and then I'll jump into what you're talking about tones. Before I get into like my overall thoughts. But I went to eBay 5 minutes after this movie was done, and I bought it for like $5. I immediately realized, why don't I own this movie?
Yeah.
So that what it was for me. The awkward years, right? This was a time for comic book movies that they were finding themselves, and it's kind of the reason why I think me and you love the Spider-Man films by Sam Raimi. You know, they're being serious, but also they're kind of goofy. You know, they're 1 foot in, 1 foot out of embracing the source material while also doing its own dramatic thing. It's also, I think there's a heavy reliance on practical effects here because like the CGI just wasn't there, you know?
Yeah.
But yes, there's a nostalgic vibe to this. Now, here's my anecdote. Back in 2004, I worked for Cineplex Odeon. I was, just how old was I? I was probably like 15 working at Cineplex. And back then, this movie was rated R in the States. Okay. Another thing that is very strange for now. We get a superhero movie, tentpole rated R. That's not Deadpool, right? So back in, for people that don't, well, for Americans who don't know what's going on anywhere else in the world, in Canada, we have a very different rating system. So
is it the metric system?
That's the MPAA, you know what I mean? It's like the metric parent. And in the States, it's fairly easy to get an R rating. In Canada, it's actually very difficult. It goes from PG to 14A, so you can be 14 years old or being accompanied by an adult to watch the movie, and then it becomes 18A, which you have to be 18 years old or accompanied with an adult to see it. And then there's R. R has to be I think Sin City was R-rated because of all of the nudity, all of the graphic violence, all of the stuff that's going on. But it is actually very difficult back in the mid-2000s to get an R rating in Canada. So just a different time. But this movie was rated, I believe, 14A in Canada. So a lot of people saw it here. And I worked there. And I had watched this movie many times while working, just doing theater checks and making sure the sound is good and whatnot. I actually own the double-sided theater print poster, cool. Which is cool. It's just like the logo. It's fucking awesome. It's like one of my favorite things. And I just really liked this movie back then, and I hadn't revisited it in a long time. And man, it's violent. I did not realize how violent this movie was, and especially the beginning. So, in the 1989 Punisher movie, I had discussed that throwing us right into Frank Castle's career as the Punisher is something that's cool, and I like that idea, but you still have to give me a reason to care for him on an emotional character level, right? And in that movie, he's kind of a walking zombie. And you don't exactly know why. Like, his wife and kids were killed, but you're still like, well, I didn't see it. So, and I didn't see his life fall apart. But in this movie, Jonathan Hensley kind of made it his mission to make it a lot worse for Frank Castle. And you'd think getting your wife and kids killed would be bad, but he goes he goes to the nth degree on this one. And he has a quote here saying, "I had to ask myself intellectual questions like, to what extent do crimes against a person become so unconscionable, so heinous, that even a person who does not believe in vigilantism can resort to vigilantism in a more just way? That was the equation for me. I told Marvel that I didn't just want to do a revenge story, that I wanted to do the mother of all revenge stories. I wanted to ramp everything up. I can't really go further without doing spoilers here. The underlying events that give rise to Frank Castle's vigilantism are not from the comic. I invented a lot of that. I made it a lot worse." Now, the first 20 minutes of this movie feels like such impending doom. You're waiting for this crossroads of despair to intertwine because you know, as a Punisher fan, or even if you have somewhat knowledge, you know that, oh, he's going to go through a family tragedy. In this film, I mentioned in the plot summary that he's going to a generational family reunion upon his retirement in Puerto Rico. So his entire family is at this reunion. Kids, nieces, nephews, uncles, aunts, his parents, his kid, his wife, just everybody you can think of. And what happens is they are all fucking wiped out. And it is, I mean, I'm getting chills right now. It is a wild swing for 2004 for a Marvel comic book movie to do that. It is horrifying. It's very effective. They don't shy away from the violence. And especially in the age that we're in now, in 2024, you know, the age of mass shootings, the age of like just total tragedy that we see almost every single day, it actually really did affect me. I was like, oh my God, like this is fucking hard shit that's going on here. And from that point on, I just got who Frank Castle was, who the Punisher was. And that was what was missing from the 89 movie for me. So the 04 Punisher, and now we can discuss it. Sorry, I'm going on a little bit of a tangent. I apologize. But like I really, really enjoyed this. Like I started texting friends after that grew up with it, just like I did, and was like, man, Thomas Jane was really our Punisher, and we didn't even know it. And yeah, there we go. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No. I just want to say, like, because you mentioned Jonathan Hensley making the origin even more heinous. Like saying it's not just his wife and kids. It's his wife, kid, and his entire extended family, his parents, everything. To almost to the point of like, is this getting too ridiculous? But he said it like it really does make it like more awful, and it justifies maybe him becoming the Punisher a little bit more. But one thing you forgot to say, because you're comparing it to the 1989 version, saying, well, It's just so much better because they don't show the origin. Well, the other element is Thomas Jane can act. So, again, no offense to Dolph Lundgren, who we both like a lot, especially.
And we don't like making fun of actors.
But as we said, in 1989, Dolph Lundgren wasn't ready yet to carry that emotional weight of a film.
Not at all.
And Thomas Jane can. And Thomas Jane really sells the emotion of what happens here. I mean, the scene where he is cradling his family and screaming before, I was going to say before being taken out himself. Obviously, of course, they don't take him out, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, he gives a performance. And then even later in the film, he sells like the deadness inside, but the glimpses of humanity remaining. He can do it. So that's the other obvious advantage this movie has over the 89 version, along with a lot of other things we're going to talk about. But on a conceptual level, the fact that you do get the full origin and the fact that you have a better leading man, the 1989 version almost doesn't stand a chance against this. So like it's not really a fair comparison.
Vaya con Dios, Castle. Go with God.
God's gonna sit this one out.
I will say, though, because you say the movie is really, really violent. I mean, I agree, but it is also, this is a pretty weak R in terms of like, the state's rating. Like it's definitely not as bloody or as gory as it could be. And that even makes me think too, when we talk about like even my like relationship with this movie and even maybe yours over the years, and like why we're both going back now and being like, wow, do I like this more than I thought? Without giving anything away about what we're going to say in the next episode, I do also think a part of it is just that the next Punisher movie, Punisher Warzone, also had a side effect of making, people kind of revalue their relationship with this one. Sure. So that's probably something we'll talk about next time, But I think that's probably part of it why now I would say to people, it's probably worth it to go back and revisit this movie, and just don't compare it to Warzone. Just remember these are two different films from two different filmmakers, two different tones, and let this movie be what it is without having to say, well, which one do I like better or whatever.
For sure. And I think what I mean by how violent it is, I think it's because it's more the context is more about the time of Marvel Comics, where we're at, where we could have taken wild swings with the characters, but like again, they massacre 20-30 people in your first 20 minutes, like with squibs, with blood gushes. There's F-bombs throughout the movie. There's a boiling water burn, piercing torture, knife through a jaw. There's also a titty sighting at 44 minutes, so there's that too. So like this one, I think was, especially in Canada, to be 14A at the time. I swear it was. There's no way this was R-rated. I don't even know if it was 18A, but still, you could go watch this with a parent. And I guess, in the context of now, like this Punisher movie is basically the Netflix show. You know what I mean? That people were like, oh my God, we really wanted that. And you had it 20 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I do wonder if like an MCU Punisher now would even be as violent as this.
Oh, it won't be.
Yeah.
I'll call it right now.
I'll say right now, the knife through the jaw is the best. Like that's
the best.
just
It's so good. So
great.
good. So good. Oh, also another thing that I like about this characterization of Frank Castle and the way that Thomas Jane plays him is that he they do enough work to show that he was like ex-CTU, ex-FBI, you know, he's got like a whole career to him, and he actually uses these skills throughout the movie. And I think that's great too. He becomes kind of like, not only is he punishing people by killing them, because of course, but he's actually using his wits and his skills and all the things he's learned over the years to punish people mentally. You know what I mean? Like he's putting people through the ringer, and I found that so interesting in this version.
Okay, so I will say this is where we're going to get into the beginning of an interesting discussion, I think, because I'm not exactly sure how I feel about a big section of this movie. Because as I said, I do enjoy it. Ultimately, I'm going to come down on the positive side of this movie. Mm-hmm. But I've already said what one of my critiques is, and I'll get back to that, like the tonal shifts. But another element of it is that, and I remember this was my thing at the time too, and I'm sure if you dive into old reviews and stuff, you'll probably find other people say this. And I think this is even what Thomas Jane's issue with the film is, because he's kind of said he doesn't really feel like this movie ultimately reflected the Frank Castle he wanted to play, and he wasn't super satisfied with it. When I go see a Punisher movie, I do kind of want to see the Punisher killing all the bad guys, you know, and it being like this really kind of dark and like very violent, you know, full of action scenes. And a lot of this is Frank Castle executing this really complex psychological game on the villains to make Howard Saint kill his own wife and best friend. And it's interesting, and the way it plays out is obviously entertaining, and it's cool to see the pieces come together. But I will say I still have mixed feelings about that, where I'm like, is that what I want to see from a Punisher movie? And that's why the first line of my like overall review was, when this movie is a Punisher movie, I think it's great. And the good news is we do build to that. Like the last 15 to 20 minutes of this is finally everything I want to see from a Punisher movie. And I will acknowledge this is supposed to be an origin movie. So I guess if there has to be a Punisher movie that works in that structure, it should be this one, you know, where we build to him finally becoming the Punisher you want to see. But I won't deny that a part of me doesn't feel like the middle section of this feels like a Punisher movie. Does that track? Does that make sense? Like,
it makes sense. I guess I just know what's coming into the next episode or the next movie, and I know what we got. And I get it's hard to keep that mindset separate. And I guess I wasn't as bothered by it because I think I was genuinely interested in what he was doing. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like I thought his mental manipulation over Howard Saint and his cronies was excellent. Like it just felt so fun and mean and like when ultimately it does crescendo, it's brutal and it's really well done, and you know, like the final standoff between Howard Saint and Frank Castle feels like almost fist pumpy, you know, not even just almost, I mean fist pumpy. Yeah. Like the way, you know, spoilers, the Punisher's gonna win. And when he wins, it's like iconic. Like there's a few scenes in this movie that I will never forget. And it's the scene when he takes out Howard Saint, the scene with the Russian, you know, like there's these moments in the movie where, I guess you're right. When it does become a Punisher movie, that's what I'm talking about, is what I love. I guess that's what you're saying.
I think what you just said is actually dead on. This is where it gets complicated for me, because I do like the movie, but I have to admit, I don't know that I still don't think the movie works as a whole. I think this movie is like a collection of a lot of sequences I like.
Sure.
Like there's a lot of great sequences and individual scenes, and I don't know that the connective tissue holding them together is as strong and effective as it could be. But like you said, I do remember those scenes. The Russian fight is awesome. I love the little sequence with Harry Heck, which I know we'll talk about.
Oh, so good.
The entire last 15 minutes is great. You know, as you said, the opening 20 minutes is great. So there's a lot of like individual like moments and sequences in this I like, enough to ultimately push me over into a positive review. I do think as a whole it's not as good as it could be. But as I
Interesting.
said, still getting there and still a better Punisher movie. Oh, and we should also mention he does wear the skull.
Oh,
now,
yeah. Oh, and first of all, the main title sequence makes that noticeable. The entire main title sequence is like the skull appearing, basically being like, yeah, guys, we got the logo this time.
Now, do I love that they gave the skull an origin to where it's a shirt his kid bought like on the beach and says it's like he bought it from like a witch doctor or something and it's like supposed to ward off evil spirits? No, I don't. Especially since good spoiler alert, that did not work. Like he gives it to his dad. This shirt wards off evil spirits. The next day, his entire family's murdered, and he's like, I guess we'll keep wearing this shirt. I think they could have left that out, but obviously, I'm happy the shirt is there, and ultimately he has the skull.
Yeah. I also liked. Let's do a little mini score horror for a second. I really liked the theme conducted by Carlo. What's his name? Carlo Ciliotto, Italian composer. My brethren. I really liked the classical, emotional, almost Rambo-like music. Like Rambo First Blood music. I really like this one.
That's not the comparison I would make, but I get where you're coming from. But because to me it makes sense that he's Italian because to me the score sounded like a kind of a spaghetti western.
Oh,
score.
for sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I just really like the main theme. Like throughout the movie, it's fine, but the main theme I think is like excellent. It's excellent.
Yeah, I agree. I was gonna say I think the score is forgettable overall, but the main theme is cool. And even those opening credits you talked about are really cool, like the animated, like kind of old school noir opening credits. I like that sequence.
They used to do that all the time in the 2000s Marvel movies. Hey, they used to have these awesome opening animated title sequences. Like the X-Men ones were always so cool. I remember going to those X-Men movies being like, oh, what's gonna be like the new CGI title sequence? They don't do that ever anymore. Hey, it's annoying.
Well, no, but now you get them at the end, and then you get to see a scene where they introduce a new character that you'll never see again. So
it's true. Well, I mean,
imagine if Harry Styles showed up at the end of The Punisher, and he's like, "I'm Howard Saint's other brother," and like.
Yeah, or the little goat Patton Oswalt CGI abomination. All right, back to The Punisher. Travolta. I know I mentioned Howard Saint a bunch now. Giving off some Sean Archer vibes, I felt. A little bit of face-offs going on here. I think he understood the assignment.
That's what happens when you don't watch your money. You lose everything, Howard. Everything.
14 shipments are perfect. One went bad, and I get this why. Because you want to scare me? There's no insurance in this business, you know that. So I'm not covering your fucking losses. And Mike, if you don't like it, just remember one thing. I've got more guns than you do.
With all due respect, we don't have more guns. It's my duty to...
It's your duty to make Castle dead. I don't care what it takes, what it costs. Call the Russian.
Hey, I like him. I like him in this a lot.
No, I do too. I think, as I said, like this goes back to what I said about like a movie like Swordfish, which is like undeniably a much worse movie than this.
Oh yeah.
But again, the only thing that kind of makes Swordfish well, there's a couple things, but
nice.
The other thing that makes Swordfish watchable is how like I do like over the top mode John Travolta. Mm-hmm. I like when John Travolta knows he's in a campy movie and decides to camp it up. It's something he did very well in Broken Arrow, also co-starring Samantha Mathis.
Yep.
It's something he did well in Face Off, and it's something he's doing well here. Yeah, he's definitely fun in this. I mean, he plays a villain that you can't wait to see get taken out, and that's, as you said, that's the assignment. We should hate this guy, but we should also enjoy watching him, and quite a fun performance.
I texted my brother right after being like, man, I forgot that The Punisher 2004 rocks. And my brother texts me back and he goes, yeah, I got to rewatch that one. I just remember absolutely hating the villain. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, yes, that's what makes a great revenge movie, Like I need to absolutely cheer my hero on, and I need that fucking villain to die and get the worst comeuppance. And it's kind of like Face Off, honestly. I know I just mentioned Sean Archer, but when he is Castor Troy / Sean Archer, you fucking hate that guy. Like, you can't wait for him to get killed. And I think this movie does it. The fucking cars exploding, the big skull flame. Oh, so good. So good.
That moment, though.
Awesome.
Like, I wish that we first saw like the 20 minutes of like
Oh,
Thomas
yeah.
Jane like having to like well, not just set it up, but like sitting at home doing the equations of like, all right, which cars do I have to put the bombs on?
Hey,
So
he's
it creates
CTU,
the skull.
baby. He's fine. He's got Jack Bauer skills.
Seems a little unnecessary, but okay, all right.
It's just cool. It's awesome. It was awesome.
There was something like at that time too, where like they fucking like the Crow sequel has the moment where he creates the Crow symbol and like flame, and then Daredevil does it in the Ben Affleck movie. They loved flaming symbols back then.
It was a thing. It was a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I actually really like the Misfit Neighbors. I want to ask you about this.
Well, they are taken directly from Welcome Back, Frank. So that's
Oh,
one
no
element
shit.
Like that.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So like Welcome Back, Frank. I do want to talk about this because I think
Great.
I
Yeah.
have a lot of feelings about this because it comes right from the Welcome Back Frank thing. In Welcome Back Frank, the Garth Ennis comic, he has taken up residence in a squalid like little apartment building in the ghettos of New York. There are 3 other people living in that apartment building. Joan, a very like in the comic, a very like mousy, shy, afraid of everything woman who's like who's afraid to basically leave the building because of how scary the city is, but has a crush on Frank Castle. Spacker Dave, as he is called in the comic, a guy who is just like his face is just like full of piercings, and the kind of like recurring joke with him is every time like Frank's coming back to the building because everyone calls him Mr. Smith, and like Dave goes, "Hey, Mr. Smith," and Punisher will go, "Dave," and then Spacker Dave always goes, "Spacker Dave," like he wants to make sure Frank calls him Spacker Dave, and that goes on and on until finally Frank calls him that near the end of the book. Cool. And then Mr. Bumpo, a gigantic overweight character. So yeah, like in the book, they're kind of created as like these 3 little comic relief characters, but also like they become this bizarre support system for the Punisher when people start coming after him. And I agree with you. I think they work really well in the movie. I think some of the best stuff in the movie is actually the stuff like the scenes with him interacting with them, and like the levity they bring to the movie. I will say this gets back to what I'm talking about the tonal shifts of this. And this is why I say it's a movie of sequences I like, where I'm like, I think there's like 2 Punisher movies battling in this, and I like each of them individually. I'm not sure they work well together. It is jarring when you go from like how awful the family slaughter is, and then like 2 minutes later you cut to like showing the Punisher living in this apartment building. It's like, and now here are 3 goofy characters, and especially Bumpo and Dave. You're like, whoa, like the tonal shift is extreme.
But they're not super goofy. Like they're just kind of dorks.
And to be fair, all 3 are toned down from what they even were in the comic.
Okay.
But still, it is. I mean, it's still a tonal shift. But
it's hard to make the change after 30 people have been massacred. I agree. with you.
Yeah. It's strange, but I do think those sequences really work. And like, obviously, I'm never going to turn down a Rebecca Romijn, sighting.
Sighting.
She's like Sasquatch or something.
You're sitting out in parks with like binoculars and shit. That's funny.
I do think it's very funny, and it's like very telling of like how Hollywood operates. That like, and I'll post this on our Instagram too. Like the difference between how Joan is characterized in the comics, and then like I think she's even called in the comics like Joan the Mouse because she's supposed to be very like mousy, and they're like, oh, who should we get to play that like kind of mousy like shy? Oh, get Rebecca Romijn. Have a fucking supermodel like living down the hall from him, But
I also think it's funny that before multiverses were a thing, she was playing Mystique already in the X-Men universe, and here in the Punisher, just 1 year apart, which is crazy.
Well, and Ben Foster would soon go on to play Angel in the X-Men films as well.
Correct.
The fact that John Panette was not asked to play the Blob is surprising.
Was he dead by then?
I don't think so. No.
Funny, I have a little not a history with John Panette, but as a kid, when Just for Laughs would air up here, it's a comedy festival in Canada. I don't know if you're aware of Just for Laughs, but it's quite a gigantic comedy festival in Montreal, and we had this comedy network, and Just for Laughs would always air on there, and John Panette was like a regular on there, and he was one of the early comedians that I saw as a kid with my parents, and we just thought he was the fucking funniest guy.
Yeah, John Panette was one of those, like, we've talked in previous episodes about how there was like a stand-up comedy boom in the 80s and early 90s, and John Panette was one of those guys who just, like, if you watched a lot of stand-up comedy, you always saw him come out and do like those 2 or 3 minute sets on all those shows, and I feel like everyone, like, I just always, like, and whenever I see John Panette, the first thing I think, and I'm sure it's probably for you too, is in my head I instantly just hear like, "You go now," like that's like that whole routine about like the Chinese restaurant,
you big, you eat vegetable, like he He was great.
So I went to this Chinese all-you-can-eat buffet, and well, the owner, he got pissed. I mean, he was rude, though. He'd come out every hour. Son of a bitch, still here. Look, he go again. He started screaming at me. You go now. You here 4 hours. Why you here 4 hours? You not come here anymore. Why you have spare rib? You're so big. Eat vegetable. Eat broccoli. You scare my wife.
He was I really like that guy, and then unfortunately he died a few years ago. I mean, he wasn't the healthiest, but
yeah, I will say though, like one thing I'll give him like a lot of credit for, and this is like for him and the script is, like I said, in the comic, Bumpo is just kind of an easy punchline.
Sure,
like this really fat guy. There's a part in the comic where the Punisher comes back home and he sees something going on. He asks Dave what's happening, and Dave explains. He's like, "Oh, Mr. Bumpo had another one of his heart attacks, but he couldn't get out the door, so they're breaking down the wall." And it shows like the ambulance like breaking down the wall, and, like a helicopter taking him out on a stretcher. And then when Bumpo comes back, he comes back from the hospital and he's got like 8 pizzas. And Frank's like, "What's going on?" He's like, "Oh, it turns out it was just a minor heart attack. So the doctor said I should kind of be a little healthier. So I figured like these 8 pizzas would be a good way to start." And it's like, okay, we get it. Yeah, and I like that in the movie instead, they don't play up the overweight thing, except for like the one moment where Joan says like, "Well, you can probably guess which one is Bumpo." Like it's kind of like that's kind of the only joke about it.
Sure.
But instead, John Panette just plays it as like he's really sweet. He's like a really sweet man, and I like that that characterization of it instead.
Well, all 3 of them are sweet. Like you look at Ben Foster, and he's got all these piercings in his face, and later on gets tortured because of it in a horrific scene, especially for somebody that used to have an eyebrow piercing. Oh my God, I was dying during watching that. But and also Ben Foster, been tortured the most in movie history, maybe. That man is always getting close to death in movies.
This would really reminded me of, there was a period where didn't it just seem like Ben Foster was going to be like the biggest thing in the world?
Yes.
Because he was a constant scene stealer and everything. He steals a lot of scenes in this. He stole the show in a brief role in 30 Days a Night. Mm-hmm. He steals the movie from Russell Crowe and Christian Bale in 3:10 to Yuma. He's somehow the best performance in that.
That's why it was so exciting when he was going to be in X3. I remember being like, holy shit, Ben Foster. This is before like all this crazy tweets and internets and all this. But when in 2006 and he was cast as Angel, I was like, oh my God, Ben Foster's going to be Angel? And then
was that the beginning and the end for that, you think? Was X3 the moment that like derailed him that much? Or
honestly, it could have been because 30 Days a Night was a year later. Okay. So and then he did what? He did Pandorum. That was nobody watched that. Yeah, you know what? Maybe you're right.
He's never really like he's never come back and had the career like even like in recent years like he was like again he finally got a bunch of acclaim again for Hell and High Water, but it didn't like instantly follow up on that. So he like I'm not saying he doesn't work. Obviously he's remained a working actor. He's played plenty of strong roles, but he's never had the like kind of mega stardom I expected him to have when he was stealing all these movies in the early 2000s.
You know what movie I love and I own, and I think I've seen it more times than I probably should admit? Hostage from 2005.
Yeah, good movie.
I think that's awesome. Okay, what I was going to say about these 3 characters, okay? They are very, very sweet. And what they act like it sounds like what they act like in the book, but in the movie it comes clear that they are absolutely Frank's moral center. They are his humanity. He's not going to lose himself because these characters are here to stop that from happening. And it keeps him a character and not a caricature. And I think that's why I like this trio so much. He's not just a walking zombie like the 89 version. And I hate to compare them, but I think this trio is just like they say it, like they're, his family surrogate.
You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. I've brought you nothing but trouble. Why are you ready to die for me?
Because you're one of us. Your family.
and I love it because of it. I really do.
I agree. I think it works really well. I think it, in fact, like that element of it works even better in the movie than it does in the Ennis book. Because Ennis does typically play the Punisher really more, I don't want to say one note, but he definitely plays him just more of like a hollow person,
Sure.
and like kind of the characterization of Ennis's Punisher is really just like mind on the mission, very, very tough to get distracted by anything else. It still kind of builds the same place where when he leaves like money for the three like people, like the three I don't want to call them roommates, but housemates or whatever.
The neighbors.
The neighbors. But it's not, there's not quite as involved. There's no scene in the comics where he goes and has dinner with them or anything. So I think the movie actually does that better, which you would expect. A movie version of the Punisher is always going to have a little bit more humanity than the comics. I accept that, and I think using these three characters to pull that out is a good way to do it. Now, I will say, I want to ask you about this, Chris, because I definitely remember 2004, Trevor, especially watching this movie and going, I think if Rebecca Romaine was my neighbor and she was clearly coming on to me, I'd get over my dead wife pretty quickly here.
Yeah, but remember, it's not just his dead wife; it's his dead fucking generational family.
Okay, but also remember, this is 2004 Rebecca Romaine. Have you seen her? Like, you just watched this movie. Like, I'm just saying.
Hey, even if it was 2024 Rebecca Romaine, I mean, I'm surprised you haven't thrown your Star Trek at me yet.
I was trying, yes, we were going to get there, but clearly, as we know, Rebecca Romaine currently playing #1 on Star Trek Strange New Worlds. So
yes. I'll put the theme. I'll put the theme underneath everything here because I have to now, and unbelievable.
All I'm saying is, if I could say anything to Frank, I'd say, look, I know you lost your whole family, but you gotta start a new family at some point, right?
Hey, they do have this really sweet moment where they almost. I don't know if they almost kiss, but I think because they're just both so obviously attractive, I mean, that would probably happen in real life, but it gets close enough and not happen that it works for me. You know? Like, it's not one of those, it's not a will they, won't they? It's they shouldn't.
No, obviously, I'm being glib, and I'm joking.
I know you
around.
are.
You don't want to see Frank hook up with her. In fact, they play it to the right level where she seems like she's trying to maybe get to that, but he's not ready. And in the movie, it's only been a few months too. So
yeah. Okay, the two cool assassins. Okay, we mentioned the Russian already. I will say, how cool would it have been if that was Dolph Lundgren?
That would have been pretty awesome. Although maybe it would have confused people, but...
Oh, yeah, the 5 people that saw that movie
good point,
at a comic convention. Yeah. That would have been cool. And the Russian fight is awesome. It is this perfect level of brutality and comedic timing, and goes to your point about, kind of smashing both of Garth Ennis's books together. That's where I think it was most apparent.
Well, again, and the Punisher, the Russian fight is from Welcome Back, Frank. Again, it's like an entire issue of Welcome Back, Frank. In fact, I think it spans 2 issues. It's so long. And again, as an indication of what I mean about how the movie will tone down the little bit of the extreme easy humor of Garth Ennis, the way he ultimately dispatches the Russian in the comic is he throws Mr. Bumpo on top of him and suffocates him.
Wow.
So clearly they changed that a little bit here. But otherwise, the rest of the fight is almost panel for panel from the comic.
Cool.
The moment where he's slamming the Punisher's head into the refrigerator, right from the comic. The moment where he smashes the gun so it can't be used, right from the comic. But yeah, there's a lot of great that full fight sequence is a great example of excellent dark comic timing. You know. There's an edit point there. I know we love our editing. There's such a great edit where he smashes the gun and then it just cuts to outside in the hall and Thomas Jane just comes it just gets thrown through the wall. And I was also really impressed that that's clearly Thomas Jane taking that stunt too, getting thrown through the wall. The part where he throws the grenade at him and he takes the pipe and just hits the grenade right back into the room where Frank is. That's really funny. That whole sequence is great. We should say that we mentioned that's not Dolph Lundgren. It is actually the wrestler Kevin Nash. So as people might know, if you don't know him as a wrestler, you might know him as Super Shredder in Secret of the Ooze, the second Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie.
He also gets stabbed in
for
real in this movie, which is a pretty brutal when you know that. And he doesn't break character, and it sounds like that's the cut that they used, or the take they used.
Yeah, so apparently like the prop master accidentally gave Thomas Jane a real butterfly knife instead of a prop, and Jane
God damn it, Alec Baldwin was on that set too. Crazy.
I'm fine. He's not.
I know you mentioned just the athleticism and physique of Thomas Jane, and we haven't even mentioned that, but the dude's fucking ripped. He trained for like 7 or so months with the Navy SEALs, and he put on like 20 pounds of muscle, and the guy is ripped, but not like Chris Hemsworth Thor ripped, be that when it's like, oh, that guy's definitely totally natural, that guy. But it actually looks like Thomas Jane is natural.
Yeah.
I don't think that Thomas Jane is throwing HGH in his ass. I think this man is actually like, he looks like a normal guy that has been working out, you know? Yeah. And also a bruiser, though. Like, he looks like a bruiser, which I love.
Oh, yeah. He looks intimidating. Like, he's just big enough to where it's like, yeah, that guy I would not want to fight that guy, you know? But, yeah.
Now, Harry Heck. Go.
Harry Heck. Harry Heck is also in Welcome Back, Frank, although he's like in only 3 panels, and he's not really at all. It's just like in that comic, there is a sequence where like in that clearly the villains are not the original people that killed Frank's family, because that's long in the past at this point.
Sure.
That book is about Frank going up against a Ma family led by a woman named Ma Ganucci. And Ma Ganucci is the one who's hiring all these different hitmen to go after Frank, and there's just like a little montage where she hires different hitmen, and Frank like dispatches all of them like immediately. And we see Harry Heck is just like a cowboy, basically. So one of them is a cowboy, and he's introduced, and 2 panels later, the Punisher's already killed him. So I think Jonathan Hensley just liked that name. He just liked the name Harry Heck.
Sure.
And clearly he had this idea, and I think this idea makes sense because Harry Heck is basically Johnny Cash. And he's played by a country artist named Mark Colley, who I found out actually did play Johnny Cash in a short film that he wrote.
Oh, wow.
So he had already had history playing Johnny Cash. And it really makes sense that this movie has like a Johnny Cash hitman, because this was, you probably remember this too, Chris, this was also like the height of the Johnny Cash like comeback, especially for like young people, because obviously Johnny Cash was a very successful country artist for decades, and then, you know, kind of hit some like leaner years, and then in the mid 90s teams up with Rick Rubin for what are called the American recordings, and in particular 2002's American 4, which has his cover of Nine Inch Nails' Hurt, like just blows up big time. And suddenly Johnny Cash is like reintroduced to a whole new generation. Young people now love Johnny Cash again. And it's like he just had this huge moment in the early 2000s, which of course culminates with Walk the Line, the biopic about him the next year after this.
Right.
So I'm sure if Johnny Cash was like younger and like more capable, they would have had him play this part. But instead, they just got a guy who looks just like him, comes in and sings a song that sounds like Johnny Cash. It's a great moment. And I don't know if your like copy that you bought is like this, but I know the DVD I have, that song plays over the DVD menu. So if you
really?
If you just leave it sitting there, you're definitely gonna have this song burned into your brain. See, another moment I never forgot from this movie.
Well, and a moment that I actually like, it made so much sense to me, because I too would brutally kill somebody if they broke out into song singing to me at a restaurant. I would absolutely want them to die. So
even if it was Johnny Cash, though.
You know what? Yeah, stop singing for real. So just stop doing that to me in public and cornering me while I eat my pancakes.
The only thing, like, it's funny because this again comes back to like what I mean about how my sensibilities or like my opinion on something can change over time. I think when I first saw this, I remember thinking it was stupid that they introduced that character. He comes and has this amazing entrance where he sings this song. Then he's like, I'm going to sing that song at your funeral. And then he's like instantly dispatched in the next scene. But now that's like kind of funny to me.
It's like,
totally. Oh, he shows up and he seems like this ultimate threat, and then he's just done almost immediately. Like there is like a dark humor to that actually I like now.
For sure. Yeah. Another brutal death that I want to bring up is obviously when Howard Saint kills his wife is terrible, and it's like really mean-spirited and gross. He throws her over a railway and gets hit by a train, and it's like he's just so done with her at that point because he totally believes that she's having an affair with his best friend, Quentin. And the Punisher has kind of manipulated them both. It's almost like a reverse Othello, which is what they get at with making the movie.
Look at that rock. Look at it. No, take a look. I gave you that when I had nothing. And all I asked for in return was loyalty.
I have been loyal to you, Howard. You're not making any sense.
Here, look at this. I found that in Quentin's bed. Does that make enough sense for you? Huh? Huh? No. Me neither. Need a martini.
Now, the death of Quentin is so... Oh, man. So, Howard Saint confronts Quentin in his... at his house. And at this point, Howard Saint 1000% believes that he is sleeping with his wife. And he's there to kill him. And at this point, Quentin doesn't know what's going on because he's being manipulated by the Punisher. Frank Castle has discovered that Quentin is gay and he's closeted and basically is ransoming those photos of him gay to show to Howard Saint and ruin their relationship in the sense of that he's been hiding something from his best friend and confidant all these years. He can't be trusted, yada, yada. Okay? When Howard Saint confronts Quentin in his house and Quentin doesn't know what's going on and he starts to stab him, and Quentin, played by Will Patton, the great Will Patton, actually. Yes, I love him in every single movie he's ever in. I love him. Yep. But when he's getting stabbed, he starts to like softly say like, "Oh, like you're killing me. What are you doing? You're killing me."
What do you think I'm an idiot?
Have you lost your mind?
You were my brother. I gave you everything tonight. You were nothing. But it wasn't enough. Might live.
What is he telling you? Don't do this. Don't do this. Don't do this. You kill him. You kill him. Why? Why you kill him? Why you kill him?
And dude, I saw a video on Reddit a couple of years ago, and it was like, sometimes I frequent our public freakout, and my girlfriend hates that I do it because I just I torture myself because I just watch people get in fights and get into brutal fights and they hit their heads or something, and it just ruins my day. I don't know why I watch it. I can't look away. But sometimes there'll be a clip of like real people, you know, dying, sure, but getting in a fight or robbing somewhere, and this like robber was like robbing a clerk, and the clerk started to stab the guy, and the guy was like, hey, I'm dying, hey, you're gonna kill me, I'm dying. And dude, nightmares. So, watch this movie. Affecting. That's my story.
There's a scene like that in Friday the 13th Part 4 also, where Jason's killing a guy in the basement. He's like screaming out, "He's killing me!" And like a lot of people have always talked about how they find that scene so chilling. I kind of don't. To me, it plays like a little silly in that moment.
Classic Trev.
This one is more effective because as you just alluded to, the secret sauce here is you have an actor of Will Patton's caliber delivering it. Yes. And that's the thing, is like Will Patton, I'm totally with you. Will Patton rules. He's one of those guys who is almost never the leading man, always a supporting character, but man, you're always happy to see him. There's a certain level, I throw it like Will Patton, David Morse, William Fichtner, right? Those guys who are just like, totally. Oh, the second they show up in anything, you're like, yes, I'm in good hands now. And Patton is great in this. And also a cautionary tale about, why you should just accept your friends' lifestyles. Because if Howard Saint had just been more open to his friend being gay, none of this would have had to happen. Quentin wouldn't have had to keep it from him. Wouldn't have thought he was having an affair with his wife. So the real message here is Howard Saint got what was coming to him because he's a homophobe.
Are you trying to say something about John Travolta?
Well, look, I'm not going to get into any alleged talk here.
Okay.
I don't. Hey, look, you want the Church of Scientology coming after you? That's fine. I'm not picking that fight. I was going to say they've kept this secret well enough for decades, but not really.
Yeah, broken on failure to franchise. TMZ.
Can I also quickly talk about one more character that I think deserves some spotlight?
Ahead.
Because again, we don't want to just keep saying this is only compare it to the 1989 version. But in the 1989 version, we talked about how neither of us really liked the sidekick they gave him, Shakes. Sidekick talk here. Again, we still don't have Microchip, the most common sidekick from the comics, but we do get Mickey Duca, who is a low level criminal creep who works in the Saint organization. And he ends up he's part of the initial sting operation at the beginning that gets Saint's kid killed, and then later Castle kind of recruits him to be his man inside. because he's already has like this kind of like relationship with him. And I always like this, like the comics will do this from time to time where, you know, even though the Punisher is quick to murder any criminal he kind of comes across, if he sees like the merit of using like a low level person like this, he will, you know, he'll use them for information or get like recruit them to help him in some degree. And he even kind of recognizes, I think, in Mickey that this is not someone worth killing. You know,
No.
This is someone who's just in over their head in a situation and is trying, and even maybe is trying to get out of it a little bit. But again, we talk about just sometimes the casting can elevate something. Mickey's played by, I want to say, even though it's not the same level as Will Patton, but still I'd say the great Eddie Jemison, because I really like Eddie Jemison. He's another guy where not a lot of stuff, but of course people know him primarily for the Ocean's films. And he's great in Steven Soderbergh's really experimental movie Schizopolis. That's where I first saw him, and then he went on to the Ocean's films for Soderbergh. But yeah, great little character actor, and he's really fun in this, and I love the sequence. Now this is actually pulled from an earlier Punisher comic, not from the Ennis run, but from an old issue of Punisher Warzone in the 90s. But I love the moment where the Punisher tortures him by telling him he's like frying his back with like a blowtorch. Really he's just putting a popsicle against his back. Such a great idea. I've always remembered that from the comic, so I was really happy to see them use it in the movie.
Yeah, so good. I really like the guy. I liked having this like low-level crime ally versus somebody high-tech like Microchip. And Jonathan Hensley kind of did that on purpose. He didn't like the idea that this urban vigilante would be so high-tech. Yeah. He would use people in organizations like this, like using his guile and his cunning. So. Yeah, that fed into the reasons why I liked the narrative of him manipulating the Saint family. So, yeah, I like that a lot. And, you know, going back to that grand finale of like the 20 minutes of just mayhem, leading to the giant car exploding and the logo reveal, man, the moments in this are sweet. Like even starting off when Frank is off to his mission and he narrates his manifesto.
I leave this as a declaration of intent, so no one will be confused. 1. Sic vis pacem parabellum. Latin. The boot camp sergeant made us recite it like a prayer. Sic vis pacem parabellum. If you want peace, prepare for war. Number 2. Frank Castle is dead. He died with his family. Number 3. In certain extreme situations, the law is inadequate. In order to shame its inadequacy, it is necessary to act outside the law, to pursue natural justice. This is not vengeance. Revenge is not a valid motive, it's an emotional response. No, not vengeance. Punishment.
And there's a lot of like visual gags, and there's a lot of like we mentioned the knife to the fucking jaw, which is great. A lot of big action. Like even holding, he gets his other son right, and he puts his hand up because his son is pinned to his desk, right.
And this leads to my favorite line in the whole movie, actually, Chris.
Perfect.
Like, yeah, because he tells the son tells him how much his one arm's pinned, so he puts a bomb in the other arm, and says this doesn't weigh very much, but when you don't have you can't put all your weight on it, it's going to be really tough to hold up.
And then he's like you look like you work out, like stuff like that. It's so good because earlier on you see the son without a shirt and he's fucking jacked too. Yeah. So it like really does foreshadow that line. It's so good, so good.
So I love when Frank walks out of the building and encounters Howard Saint, Travolta, and Travolta is like, you killed my son, and then you just hear a scream and an explosion in the background, and Frank Castle just deadpans both of them.
You killed my son.
Both of them.
Oh, so good. That's like the moment I always remember. And that's like, that right there, that's like the Punisher, right? That is the dark humor, the dark, sick, sadistic humor of the Punisher that comes right from the Ennis run. And like this whole last 20 minutes, this is when the movie becomes the Punisher movie I wanted. Mm-hmm. I mean, he puts on like the tactical, he's got like a bulletproof vest on, he spray paints the skull on it. It looks awesome. He comes in with the bow and arrow. He's just like taking people out with arrows at first. I love the moment where he sends the Claymore mine up in the bottle of wine through the dumbwaiter. That's great. Like, yeah, this stuff is just gold, all of it.
Yeah, it's great. And he gets hurt. Again, we go back to our heroes getting hurt. In movies now, especially comic book movies, the CGI doubles of our characters get hurt, I guess, as they bump around in a computer. But in here, Thomas Jane is getting thrown through walls. He's getting shrapnel thrown at him. He's getting shot in the chest. He's getting shot in the leg. He's getting stabbed. And he keeps pushing through. And I think I guess we haven't really said it enough, but I think Thomas Jane is excellent in this role. I really do like him a lot as Frank Castle and the Punisher, both sides of it, before the tragedy and then afterwards. I really, really like him. He has that deadpan stuff, like you said. Some of the lines he said are great. The end line when he's kind of leaving the trio of the neighbors, and he's like, You're
leaving.
I have work to do. Read your newspaper every day, you'll understand.
Which section?
Obituaries.
Like, it's great. It's fucking great.
Great line, although I will say, if look me up in the paper, which section is a really weird response. I don't know that anyone would say that. Like, that's just she just has to say that to set up the line.
He's like the classifieds because I have no job and I gotta get a job.
No, I'm with you. Like I said, I went into this movie unsure of Thomas Jane in the role, not the guy I wanted, and I walked out. Even as someone who I said who had like a complicated relationship with the movie and liked some of it and didn't like others of it, he totally convinced me. Like, I walked out being like, oh yeah, that was the Punisher, and I was definitely ready to see him in more. Now that did not happen, but no, he is a great Punisher, and everything you hear about him, like as a like how invested he got in the role and everything, he wanted to do right by this character too, and that's something to give credit for as well.
Those who do evil to others, the killers, the rapists, psychos, sadists, you'll come to know me well. Frank Castle is dead. Call me the Punisher.
And yeah, he wanted to do right by this character. He tried for a while to get a sequel. We're not going to get into details now because that kind of leads into our next episode. So tune in, listeners, to our Punisher Warzone episode next time. But he did get a short film made who he spearheaded and pitched primarily himself. He came up with the idea and he gave it to a couple writers. They wrote it and then they shot it over like a day, I think, in downtown LA. And it's called Dirty Laundry. Somehow they got this made without Marvel or Disney's approval. It was leaked, quote unquote, onto YouTube. I watched it back when it aired. When was it? Was it like 2011?
It was 2012. They actually premiered it at San Diego Comic-Con.
Oh, okay.
And I can answer your question. Like, the reason they were able to do this without Marvel or Disney being involved is it's just not for profit, right? You can make any fan film you want if you're not charging anyone for it. So that was the whole thing. This was part of like there's a producer like Avi Shankar, I think his name is.
Yep.
He did like a series of these. He calls them his like the bootleg universe. He also had Joe Lynch do one about Venom that starred Ryan Quanten.
Right.
But yeah, this was like the first one of those, and yeah, they go off and make it, and then they show it at San Diego Comic-Con. They'll put it on YouTube. Leaked my ass, But yeah, they just there's no money involved, so they can do whatever they want. But what I remember is, do you remember this, Chris? Is that they debuted at Comic-Con and they just said, we have this new short to show you with Thomas Jane called Dirty Laundry, and they did not indicate to anyone it was the Punisher.
Right.
Like that was the thing. Is like, so then the audience got to discover it was the Punisher as the short goes along, because even in the short, it takes you a couple minutes to realize, oh, he's supposed to be Frank Castle.
I'm trying to think when I saw this, because I was at Comic-Con in 2012. This didn't play in Hall H then, did it?
No, it wouldn't have been a Hall H. I'm sure
That's
it was like in a smaller room. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Because I was at Comic-Con in 2011 where I met the Punisher himself. We'll post a picture to our Insta about that. But yeah, I had totally forgotten that this was at Comic-Con. Wow.
And you had a good experience when you met him? I just want to make sure, right?
I did. He was definitely just a little. I think he was a little grumpy.
Yes, I've heard
he was grumpy.
We don't like to talk shit about actors.
Yes. I have my issues with Carrie Elways. Okay, and it's been documented on our failure to series Wonder Woman TV pilot episode. Go look at that or go listen to that, listeners. I have my issues with Carrie Elways. Thomas Jane was not super happy that day.
Yeah, I've never met him myself. I don't want to say anything like too out of school, but I've heard through the grapevine, through the rumors, that if you decide to meet Thomas Jane on a con or something, you're taking your chances.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what had happened was me and my buddy, it was our first year going to Comic-Con in 2011, and we saw him basically on the edge of the like the main area. What the hell? The exhibition area?
I remember that. Yeah, because he has his own comics that he writes, so he had like a little booth there. Yeah.
So he was there, and we saw him. We're like, holy shit, it's Thomas Jane. And our most recent love for him was spawned from The Mist. And we were absolutely in love with that movie, The Mist. So we walk up to him, and I'm like, hey, yada yada. You mind for a picture? He was fine. He didn't really say anything. He just kind of leaned in,
That's what I've heard. I've heard he's just really short with people, and
he was. And to be honest, we were short as well. We didn't want to waste his time. It was like super quick. Got it. And then my buddy goes, "The Mist was fucking awesome, man." And then he just nodded at us. so that was it. Anyways, yeah, probably shoeless. He's also a weird shoeless guy. Yeah. He's one of those guys that just doesn't wear shoes anywhere.
Yeah, I mean,
it's weird.
It's like it's funny that now we're getting to like let's list all our like problems with Thomas Jane. I mean, like I do like him a lot as a screen presence. I think in recent years, like you love when I know you love when I get like political on this. I've definitely heard like a recent interview with him where again he was talking about how much he wishes he could vote for Robert Kennedy Jr.
Sure.
And he's definitely like one of those. He strikes me as like one of those do your own research kind of guys. Like really buying into like different like conspiracy theories and leaning heavily like libertarian to it like an annoying degree. But whatever. I don't have to hang out with the guy. I just have to watch his movies and TV
100%,
shows. So
100%.
like, whatever. Yeah.
But no, Dirty Laundry.
Dirty
Do
Laundry.
you like it? Do you like this thing? Like, do you?
Do I like it, dude? It's fucking awesome. Dirty Laundry rules. Yeah, it's great. Like it's. I don't really understand whenever people like Thomas Jane has said this, and you see other fans say it, where they're like, "Well, that's the best Punisher media possible. That like nails everything." No, it's still like a 10-minute short.
Yeah, exactly.
That's just the Punisher like taking out like some hoodlums in like an alley. But it's great. Like it does feel just so like dark, dirty. It's got its problems. The blood is all like bad CGI, and the score is just the Dark Knight score like ripped in.
Yeah.
But it's fun to see Ron Perlman show up in it, and yeah, it's a really fun. If nothing else, here's what I like about it. I like that he got to play like Frank Castle one more time in a way that like in something he spearheaded, and that he's even said got to let him kind of make more peace with the character.
Yes,
because he tried to do a sequel that he that was more in line with what he wanted to do and never got it made. So I'm happy that this exists, that he was able to put it to bed and be like, okay, even if it was only for 10 minutes in an unofficial short film, I got to do my version of Frank Castle that I really wanted to do.
For sure. I agree. It's a blast of 10 minutes, and it's like another proof of concept that it's criminal that this guy didn't get to make 5 more movies. I think he was the perfect choice from the start. Going back to when we said, why did they think Thomas Jane would be the one and only choice? I mean, they nailed it. I thought he was, and we'll have feelings and talk about the next movie next episode, but I was really impressed with this viewing of this movie. I have so much nostalgia for it. I don't think that's clouded me. I think it is genuinely a really good movie, and you're, even if you are a little bit of a detractor and maybe remember either thinking it was fine or shitty, I would say check it out again. I really do. I think in the age of superheroes that we're at now, again, this is kind of a breath of fresh air, but not in like a bad Venom way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, that's my final take as well. I would definitely recommend people kind of revisit this if they no matter what your previous feelings were, because like I said, I kind of come back around on it to like where I have my issues with it. As I said, I still do think its tonal inconsistencies are jarring at times.
Yeah.
And I think it works. It's a lot of individual sequences that work, but more than a whole. But I agree with you that it's such a nice contrast to the kind of comic book movies we get now. And it just has this like nice air of like, oh, this is like such an interesting time capsule of a time where we were still figuring this all out. And even with like this like kind of lower budget and not everything they could have done for this character, they still made this like really kind of cool little low budget action movie. Like this is the kind of like movie that, it's this like we have movies like right now coming out like The Beekeeper and stuff where it's like, oh, it's nice to just see these like little small scale action films.
Yeah.
And this one is also still, that said, it's still also hitting the Punisher character more than the 1989 one did. You know, you've got the skull, you've got the origin, you've got moments pulled right from the Ennis run. So yeah, like it's a movie I liked when I first saw, then kind of fell off of it. Thought for years I didn't like it as much as I did, and now in this revisit came back around and said, oh no, this is enjoyable. I dig this movie.
Cool. Yeah, loved it. This was a great episode. Love talking about it. I'm excited to watch it again. I'll probably watch it pretty soon too, because like I said, I just ordered the Blu-ray after watching it, so I'll have to. That's happening again. I've started to collect again, and it's my library is exploding.
I actually have a question for you. Maybe I should say this question for next time, but just in case I would forget it, I'll ask it now. Is doing these episodes making you like want to maybe actually go back and watch the Netflix Punisher show, which I know neither of us ever did?
Not yet. I haven't gotten there yet.
Okay.
That's what I would say. I think I want to sometimes, but I honestly haven't really thought about it during these episodes. How about you?
Because I will tell you, no, I'm kind of with you. Like it's almost like I want to get there, you know, like I want something to
Sure.
get me like to want to watch like more Punisher stuff. I will say I have sat back down over the last week or so and reread a lot of old Punisher comics. Like it kind of got me in the mood. Like I did reread Welcome Back, Frank, and the direct sequel to that story that Ennis did, and I've gone back and read some of the 90s stuff too. And
Nice.
So yeah, it's been nice to kind of revisit a character too that and like a time period from the character that I used to love. So good times.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Like we said, next episode will be culminating Failure to Franchise's New Year's Punishment Party with Punisher Warzone from 2008. Only 4 years later, by the way, did we get another Punisher with a different actor and maybe even a totally different tone. We will talk about it. Follow along at F2F Pod. That's at F2, the number 2F Pod. That's on all the socials. So like us there, like us everywhere. Rate, review, whatever you do. That would be super cool if you gave us a star rating or wrote a little something on your podcast app. And then just join the tribe and hit that subscribe. And keep on with us. This is great. Love it. To 2024.
Good.
That was great. That was so much fun.
I was going to try and make some kind of like Evanescence joke, but I could never figure out like a because it does play that
Wake
Evanescence
me
song
up,
in the movie.
wake me up. Yeah, it's a different song. Yeah, I guess all those trailers at this time had that type of like, what is that, softcore? Like I don't even know what that's called.
It's that like new metal.
New metal. Yeah.
Oh, the movies had too. Like this movie, like with the there's that part of the end where he's like, "Call me the Punisher," and then it goes to black, and then like some shitty new metal song comes on. It's like,
yeah. I mean, I like Evanescence, so you cut your slander out of your tongue out, you bastard.